Hi, I'm Christy Cordingley, and this is my show, The Flare Up Show, and this special episode is produced in partnership with Clarissa Burt and In the Limelight Media. I originally created this show to advocate for myself through chronic illness, but today it's grown into a wellness show that's listened to all over the world. I love to practice well-being for the whole being. So if you're ready to rise, thrive, and elevate your life, stay tuned, enjoy the show, and thanks for listening. All right, welcome to the Flare Up Show. This show is produced by the fabulous Clarissa Burt and In the Limelight Media. And today I have Tah and Kole Whitty. They are the teachers of the Condor Approach. And that is more than just a method, it's a movement. So they're a husband and wife team, and they have the Condor Approach, which is a unique approach that combines the ancient wisdoms of indigenous plants and fungi with modern coaching so that breakthroughs last and breakdowns don't last so long. From ER nurse to psychedelic advocate, their combined experience helps coaches, nurses, and curious explorers how to prepare for, navigate, and integrate these powerful tools for transformation in a legal, safe, and informed way. So welcome, Tah and Kole. It's really nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Very excited. So maybe just tell us a little bit, just what is the Condor Approach?
Yeah, so the Condor Approach kind of spawned from my own healing journey. This is Kole, for those that might be unsure which is Tah and which is Kole. So Kole is the female, Tah is the male in our current vehicles. And so the Condor Approach started as a body mapping method I was using. I had tons of chronic health conditions. Doctors couldn't figure it out. It was fibromyalgia, endometriosis, migraines, things that they don't know where the symptoms and sources come from. So they just say, oh, you have fibromyalgia, blanket term. And so the Condor Approach started as how to translate the signals of my body. How come some days are okay and some are 10 out of 10 pain? And so I started to track everything. I had changed my diet and lifestyle, which made a big difference. It, I would say, relieved like 60% of my symptoms. But that other 40% I couldn't figure out, and neither could doctors. And I was in my late 20s. And it was one of those, if I don't figure this out, I don't feel like my body's going to hold up to 40. Now I'm about to be 42, whatever numbers. And so the Condor Approach started from that methodology of tracking and then over evolution. And then people started to ask, like, how did you do it? Then we started coaching other people, and then Tah's different methodologies and his nursing and his personal training background, which he'll share his little spiel here, is what turned into this methodology that helps people to learn how to track their nervous system, their body, their stressors, how to create more ease so the body can heal, and how psychedelics are helping more people to tap into healing spaces when done safely and, I would say, ethically.
I love
from
that.
my vantage point.
Oh, sorry. Yes, go on. Continue. I want to hear from both of you.
Yeah, from my vantage point, I'm grabbing the microphone on the wrong side. From my vantage point, the Condor Approach, the methodology that we have is a conglomeration of conceptual frameworks that people can use to navigate their nervous systems and their emotional complexes with practicality, in very practical ways that we were not taught in school. Very, very simple, practical ways that we weren't taught in school on how to interact with ourselves as individual human beings, with our bodies, with our emotions, with our thoughts, and then translate that to other people and how they work. And so the Condor Approach is a really revolutionary way to relate to the self and other people. And we use the psychedelic lens because we want people to be safe in psychedelics.
I love that. I like the Flare Up Show came from that because, similar to you, Kole, I had autoimmune disease that was never officially diagnosed for many, many years. So is it lupus? Is it rheumatoid? What is this? We don't know. And I remember saying to my doctor once, I feel like I sat in a tack and you're giving me an Advil for it. Can we just find the tack and yank it out? And and they didn't know. But what's interesting is in the healing is what you say, mapping. It's listening. For me, it was listening to the body. So the pain had messages. It's just about where it's coming from. What does it actually mean? And how do we trust that and that? So this is really, really fascinating to me. And I'm going to let you do most talking, I promise. So tell me about integration. So you learn the tools, and then you say that integration is really, really important. And I guess that would mean using some of the psychedelic tools and other things. Why is it really important to do things properly and use what you call integration?
We'll start by prefacing a little for anyone listening if they're not sure what we even mean by psychedelic,
Yeah.
because, it's like this really strange term. And then integration is a super nebulous term. So I'm going to kind of
Yes.
define them quickly. So psychedelics means mind manifesting. But in the medical world, in the drug world, that can be magic mushrooms, that can be MDMA, ecstasy, sassafras. There's different substances that most are federally illegal at this time. But there are places like Oregon and Denver, like Oregon has legalized it. Denver has decriminalized it and is working towards legalization in some ways. And then there's churches from indigenous practices, is where it comes from, that are allowed to work with these legally. And then there's government programs that are getting created and at play. And a lot of people know these substances as party drugs in college. And
Mhm.
so they have often negative associations to them, or they fear losing control. But the science of John Hopkins, for example, put 19 million into their research center. We're seeing the effects on depression and PTSD. So when we talk about psychedelics, we're talking about those substances that can have psychedelic effects or hallucinogenic effects.
Well, not even just hallucinogenic, they are state altering.
Yeah.
And so
Mhm.
there are psychedelics and entheogens that you can take that will alter your state. Now, some people have hallucinations with certain substances, and then there are other substances where you have a state change where you feel entirely different, where you have different awarenesses, or you're more dialed in. It's a change from your current constant normalized state of awareness. And so that's
And
what
so
psychedelics do.
when we talk about integration, we're talking about after any peak experience. That could be a Tony Robbins event. People, rah, rah, state change. I'm going to change my whole life for 3 weeks, 4 weeks. Right. And so for us, integration is after any peak experience. We just happen to have been working in the field of psychedelics, me for the last 15 years, Tah for the last 10, because of our own healing journeys, where we reached the end of a rope that there was nowhere else to turn. And through desperation and signs and prayer, where psychedelics came in from facilitators who were trained, who knew what they were doing, and years of experience. So integration is, what do you do after a peak experience? That could be childbirth, someone becoming a mother or a parent for the first time. There's old versions of you that don't exist anymore. They're literally like gone. So integration is, what do we do after that state change? So integration is where the rubber hits the road. Whether you had a great experience or a challenging one, say in the example of someone having a baby, for
Mhm.
us and the clients we've worked with, postpartum depression is often the grief they're carrying for who they were before, or the changes that have occurred. And suddenly maybe they were very social. Now they're suddenly isolated and alone, in contrast being in this nesting period with a new baby. So it's the what happens when is integration. Now that we have this new awareness, what are we going to do with it? We say integration's not optional, but how you integrate is. So after any big life experience, what do we do after to maintain the breakthrough, or to service and support a breakdown so that the breakdown doesn't last so long?
I like to frame integration as wholeness. Now,
Mhm.
I right, wholeness. When something comes together, it becomes whole, right? And so you have these different parts and you bring them together. I like to think about a sandcastle. You have all these disintegrated pieces of sand. You use some water and you use your hands and you bring them together and you make parts that are integrated. So things are together. And when people have psychedelic experiences, they can become disintegrated from the way they used to be. When they have a transformational experience at Tony Robbins or any kind of seminar, they are disintegrated from the way they used to be. Now, how do we reassemble everything and bring it together with intention and with focus and with a direction? And this is why people will go and do party experiences. They'll go to a rave and they'll do psychedelics, and somebody will be over in the corner crying because they've just had a psychedelic experience and they've disintegrated things, and now they don't know how to tie that back together. And so if a person doesn't have support in that space, it can become very, very challenging. Because if I have a psychedelic experience and I disintegrate from the way I was with my family before, and I go
Mhm.
back to these people different, they're going to be looking for the same person before this
Or
psychedelic
question
experience.
what's wrong
And they're
with
going to be
you.
like, what's wrong with you? Why are you trying to be so nice to me? Or why are you being so mean to me? Or why are you so different? And this can disintegrate the household. It can integrate a person's career and so on. And
Yes.
so when we integrate, with intention, when we become whole with intention, that's where the magic can happen with psychedelics or any other transformational
Any big
experience.
life change. Same with like we before we were in this field, and Tah was still nursing as like in a hospital in the ER. We would work with people who were in couples where one would change their diet and lifestyle, to lose weight, to get in better shape, or maybe they had medical concerns. We had to talk about what happens when the holidays come around and you have your habits together of how you're used to celebrating and you aren't going to be able or you choose to not engage in the same
Yes.
food or situations. How do we approach it and create the plan now is integration. How do we integrate who you are with who you want to become with support systems? It's kind of like a cast on a broken arm. You just had a break in your life or a big change. How do we support it moving forward in a way that helps fortify it, but not become codependent? Just like a cast, it has to come off at some point. We got to take the training wheels off. So
Yeah.
for us, that really embodies what integration is to us.
I love that. That all makes a lot of sense to me. I kind of laugh sometimes when I think about when I started a yoga practice because was doing yin yoga for nervous system resetting, and but I wouldn't do the shavasana at the end, which is the corpse pose where you're supposed to lay there just still and integrate. And I was like, I'm not just gonna lay here. This is boring. And I would get up, and I didn't realize till that was like the most important piece was the being aware of how my body had changed through that practice. That was the most important piece. So that's just a small example how integration
Totally.
has hung out in my life. Awesome. I love
Yeah.
that. Yes. It's almost like a transition team. I love it. Um,
Yes.
so Cole, you've spoken very openly about your own journey with addiction. So now can we talk a little bit about the potential for misuse because psychedelics,
Mm-hmm.
they're not actually physically addictive, but there could be ways that we start to misuse them. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, the whole landscape in the field has completely changed. I no longer say they can't be addictive, actually, because there's too
Oh,
many
okay.
substances being lumped into the category of psychedelics, like ketamine is getting lumped in there, which is
It's addictive.
actually quite addictive. Same with a tobacco called hape, which is becoming very common. Is very addictive. Now, not to the same effects of, say, that heroin can be or some of those more intense substances, but we like to say that what drives addiction is trauma, is childhood experiences, is a lack of resiliency and support and different things in as someone grows up. And so with these particular, we call them master teachers, when you approach them to learn about yourself, then they show up as a teacher. If you show up to use them, how does any relationship, end up functioning if you use someone or something? So it's a different energy. And so the thing to be mindful of and why it's important, at least initially, to have a guide, it's like having bumpers on the bowling alley. You're learning how to bowl. And if you want to get strikes when you're first learning, then having that support will keep you out of the gutter. So that's kind of how I like to say with this is, though many of the substances like the master teachers or fungi, magic mushrooms, they're not chemically dependent. There is no overdose amount that could kill someone from mushrooms alone. That does not mean people can't become codependent on the way it makes them escape their life.
Yeah.
So, chemically, no. But if someone is seeing God or past loved ones in those experiences, that significance can be get attachment, or they're going to retreats where these substances are taking place and they're getting codependent on the community, but it's the only place they're learning to cultivate community. So
Mm.
there's like these sneakier ways that people don't consider where, okay, maybe not chemically addictive, but especially as someone with an addiction past, um, it was very important to me to have a skilled guide that could help keep eyes on it and make sure we were going in the right direction. And I realized in this process that I had healed the parts of me that had used substances before. And that just like once I was a baby that couldn't walk, I got stronger muscles for my emotions and more resources. And that addict was not who I was ever. It was a series of symptoms and signs that I had been lacking support.
I'd love
Yeah.
to add something to that.
Yeah.
If you're into it, of course. You know, the lens that we use at the Condor Approach is addiction is a habit that has a short-term benefit with long-term detrimental consequences, right? And so something can be you can be chemically dependent upon something and not addicted to it. There's a difference. Addiction has to do with connection. There's usually a breach in connection, and someone's looking to connect. And so they'll connect with a substance, they'll connect with a feeling, they'll connect with an experience, and they do it over and over again. And it has short-term benefits, but you have to keep doing it because it doesn't last long.
Mm-hmm.
And so that when you do it over and over again, it has a long-term detrimental consequence. And most of the substances that we are talking about, the entheogenic spaces, which would be mushrooms, which would be ayahuasca, which would be
San
San
Pedro,
Pedro,
Wachuma.
Wachuma,
Mm-hmm.
these things, they don't have a chemically dependent type of dynamic, but people can get really hooked on the connection that they have at ceremonies. They can get hooked on the feeling of feeling connected to source or the divine energy. They can get hooked on that situation. And when they come out of it, if they don't have that in their households or in their careers, they go back to the place they can find connection. And that is the thing that we're talking about. When people are traumatized, trauma is a response to disintegration. It's a response to not being whole anymore. And so if they feel whole with an experience, if they feel whole with a substance, if they feel whole with that, they'll run back to that over and over again. And that's where we create connection. And so addiction is not a bad thing. It's a coping mechanism. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Yes, I love that. I was just listening to Gabor Mate talk the other day about addiction and wholeness, just the way you described it as well, right? And autoimmune even being a symptom of not being able to be whole or be yourself in safe places. So I love that. Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So psychedelics can obviously be catalysts for personal growth. Can they also amplify challenging emotions and the trauma, which we talked about? So how do they do that? How can people prepare for those difficult experiences and start to navigate them safely?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things we invite people to do is make sure that if you're going to psychedelics, have a guide or have a sitter. And we have different classifications of people that we say are great for sitting experiences. There's a trip
Mhm.
sitter, which is a person who would actually sit with
Just
you
sits there.
during the experience. They don't do any guiding or anything like that. They just sit there and make sure that you're safe.
Like you're physically safe.
You're physically safe. They'll get you water, that type of situation, and they can hold space for you. Then we have a space holder who is a person who can actually hold space like a trip sitter and then reflect things back to you as they come up.
A
Mhm.
psychedelic psychotherapist would be more in the space
A
holder.
space holder or a facilitator.
Mm-hmm.
Then you
Mhm.
move into a space of a person who we would call a psychedelic facilitator. And this is a person who can actually bring you back into yourself and swing you back to your intention and is very skilled because they've been in psychedelic spaces before. So they actually know how to navigate it. There are a lot of
Or if a
therapists.
trauma comes up.
There are a
Yeah.
lot of therapists that have never been in the psychedelic space and they're guiding people through things. And so it's really kind of hard for us to say that this is a facilitator. This is a person who's doing therapy on top of psychedelics. It's not the same thing. And so the next space I would say is what we would call a psychedelic Sherpa. And this is a person who actually goes into the experience with you and they have psychedelics along with you and they'll hire a trip sitter to stay outside of it.
Or it's
And,
very common indigenously for like ayahuasca. That's how they do
Mhm.
it.
and so these are the ways we classify people that people go to. So having somebody that is qualified, that has been through experiences, that knows these things is the best way to go. And we have a document that we call Red Flag, which we offer to people for absolutely free. And it gives you a really awesome space to look at and make sure that you are vetting the person that you're working with. And that's one thing. The next thing I would recommend is not going in for full blown hardcore ayahuasca in the
More
jungle
does not mean better.
ayahuasca in the jungle for 30 days straight. That it will wreck your nervous system. Seriously, I know people who've done
Yes.
it
And came back with
came
crazy
back
allergies
with
to things.
lots of weird body
Yeah.
stuff, things,
Autoimmune issues.
autoimmune issues, things that their
Yes.
intestines couldn't navigate after that because their microbiome was all uh, thrown into thrown out of whack. And so
Yes.
incremental spaces are my recommendations. Start off slow, start off low, and then and incrementally increase. If you're looking for the blowout situation to fix yourself right now, that for me is the way not to go about it. I don't feel like there's anything broken about a human being. I've been a nurse for 33 years. Okay. I don't think there's anything broken wrong with anybody. I feel like people are out of alignment with their purpose. They're out of alignment with themselves. And so getting into alignment, it took you a while. I'm going to be 53 next week. If I've been out of alignment for 52 years of my life to take an experience and have it happen overnight, I need to have an off ramp from where I was and an on ramp into something new. And that needs to be a gradual space. So I'm not about the big blowout experiences. I'm about gradual, low, slow, stay in the heart space and move into a space where you're working with somebody that's experienced and connected.
Yeah, and what a lot of people don't know is currently ketamine is being used in most states across the United States as a therapeutic psychedelic. And it's very different than the entheogenic because it's a dissociative. Now, it can have amazing effects for veterans, for example, to almost like dissociate them from the pain body
Yes.
for a minute and reorient in who was I outside of that these traumatic events. And then when they return with integration and with support, they can kind of release who they'd been and help the body get into a state to heal.
Mhm.
The problem is we're seeing more companies just doing remote telemedicine for ketamine. And we're seeing a lot of codependency, and we're seeing a lot of people who are becoming a level of codependency because now they need to do it every 3 months. And most of it is not covered by insurance, except for maybe some of the therapy, talk therapy associated with it. And so it's hurting the movement in many ways because it's like over accessibility and under support. And so whether it's ketamine or a doctor, that red flags document Tah's talking about helps people learn how to advocate, what questions to consider. What's their red flag, their yellow flag, and their green flag in their gut? What do they, how do they feel about the answers they get from someone they're going to trust to guide them?
You know,
Yes. Would it be similar to coaching, like when you're picking out a practitioner? Like I like to think of it as picking someone that really gets me to trust myself and my inner knowing. Is that similar with the psychedelics, like where they wouldn't just tell
100%,
you,
Absolutely.
okay, good.
100%,
and
100%.
and it's not all like that out there. There's, just
No,
like with coaches and therapists,
people will tell you what
having
to do.
a deep awareness of your own beliefs as a coach, a guide, a doctor is important, because when people are disempowered, they're looking for someone to tell them the right answer, and maybe if their conditioning or their religious beliefs or the systems they're in tells them, oh, well, you're the expert. That's how my medical journey was. But then I learned I couldn't trust anyone, so it swung the pendulum too far. And so my reclamation journey was through psychedelics to remember who I am and how to speak up for myself. My thyroid conditions was from holding back from asking for help or
Oh,
support, and it's
yeah.
because I unconsciously learned that adults around me and the systems and whatever, it wasn't going to matter anyway. So why even bother to say anything? Because it's not, no one's going to listen.
I can absolutely relate to that. Um, when it comes to making sure people are safe, and I know in the States and Canada, we have less regulation, although psychedelics are still not as available here.
Mm-hmm.
But in the US, I know it gets even trickier with different states, and there's lots
Yeah.
of different drug enforcement agency rules in various places. How can people make sure they're doing things not only safely, but that they're protected legally if they start working with some of these substances?
Here's the thing, it's an ever changing thing, and like we watched with cannabis in the States where it's legal lots of places and then not in other places. There's a point that regardless of what we say, because we certainly can't condone anything
No.
illegal or illicit, right? But that's why more people are doing tourism to places where these things are legal so they can go on retreats. But what's happening is more people are doing it on their own, regardless of whether it's legal, because they become desperate. And many of these mushrooms are growing in our backyards. But this is also saying, people, please don't just eat a mushroom you think
No,
is one of
no,
these, because it's probably not, and you could die. So, anyway, side note, you need to actually know what you're doing. Mushrooms, there's
no.
lots of them, but it's something that there's people that are really standing up to say that nature is medicine and we're being denied what's growing from the earth that God gave us as an antidote. Right. And so, what does it look like? So, it's more of there will always be a moral dilemma if you live somewhere where there's not legality. Because if you're in a place where nothing else is working, you don't even know if you're going to be here long enough to care about the legality. So it's more that I can't specifically tell anyone what is the best or most, effective. If you're concerned about legality, you have shared custody of kids, then I would be researching where is a place that you can go legally so that you can speak about it legally and help inform your environment that you're going to do it so they know what's going on. So you're not coming back and being secretive, because that causes other problems.
Mhm.
Now, Not everybody has the resources to fly to Jamaica
Costa
or Costa
Rica.
Rica or Africa. Or no, not everybody has these resources.
No.
So
Mm-mm.
people are going to go the route of finding things that are close to them. A few things that I would recommend. Don't buy things from Instagram that people are selling on
Or the black
Instagram.
web.
Don't
Don't do
buy
it.
things on the dark web.
Mm-mm.
Don't buy things in Facebook Messenger. Please don't do that. Okay. There are lots of people that have not only gotten really terrible substances and had really weird things happen, there are also people, there are police people that are watching, that are indicting people, getting people indicted over that type of dynamic. So please be mindful of yourself with that. Not everybody in the psychedelic space is there for your benefit. Okay. And so I want to make that really, really abundantly clear. I know desperation drives a lot of people to action. My thing is, if you've been in this for a while, you can wait a little bit longer. Do your research. Please do your research. Have really courageous conversations with the people that you trust and that are around you. There are a lot of people that are exploring psychedelics that are not saying anything because they don't want to get in
Yeah.
trouble. They don't want to be embarrassed by their family members and so on. And so have a conversation. Hey, I was thinking about microdosing. Have you ever heard of that? And people will usually be like, oh my gosh, I'm microdosing. I had a
It's
ceremony.
crazy.
And then you will find people that this person trusts, and then you can move into a different space. This is how I invite people to go about things. Trust yourself. And if your body says no, if your body says run in the other direction. There's a difference between being nervous and having some anxiety about something you don't know about, and your body saying absolutely not. Trust yourself with this.
Yeah, in every area and usually every state, there are psychedelic societies that are put on by, or associated with maps and some of the medicalized models. So look
Mhm.
for those first. Find the information from a source that you feel comfortable with because the laws are ever changing. Like you said, you in one county in the United States, it could be legal. You cross from Oakland to San Francisco, no longer decriminalized, right? And that's one bridge and one step. Suddenly it changes. So it's something that you have to research for your own area. And then part of it is getting really clear on what's important in your life, what could be at risk if you're not more mindful in how you approach things, your job, your kids, your just your life in general. So it's someone getting radically clear in where they are, what they believe would be on the other side of it. Because, like Tah said, sometimes desperation drives someone faster into a brick wall because it's like this has to work or else. And that pressure makes it challenging for it to work because your nervous system and all your stress hormones actually impact a psychedelic experience.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and there are some spaces where there's a difference between something being legally legalized, decriminalized, and legally defensible. And I'm not sure how it is in Canada, but in the United States, you can have something that's decriminalized and it's still illegal.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the amount of stuff that you have can get you locked away. And if you're in
And
a
your level of
and
melanation and where you live.
right, depending on
Yes,
on
yes,
your skin
yes.
color and what your background is, you
Systemic
may get
issues.
locked up for longer periods of time.
Yeah.
And so these are things to just really, really consider when you're diving into these spaces. And we have a podcast that we talk all about it, y'all. It's called the Psychedelic Coach Podcast.
Let's check
I
it out.
invite you to go take a listen.
Because all like every one of these questions, we could do a whole day, Chrissy.
I know. I know. Well, it's so interesting. And I love that you brought that up because that is definitely an issue in Canada as well. Definitely with melanated skin and also, indigenous skin is an issue, big, big issue here. So it's really unfortunate that there isn't sort of equal access or whatever to some of these things, but absolutely taking some of these things into account and finding those safe places where you can do that. Um, so I really appreciate that. Thank you. It is really about checks and balances and understanding what's best for you and getting the information from the right people that you can trust. And obviously, you have a lot of resources, so people can go to your website on our show notes to find sort of where to go and what things to look for. And I really like the red flag download that you talked about. So I did see that on your website earlier today too. It's excellent. So if we just are, if you still have a couple more minutes, I just want to get into the actual application of the substances. So how Is it different for everybody? Like we talked about the difference of maybe for people that are really new to this, could you explain what microdosing is versus maybe other types of therapy? Like we're just really, really basic.
Sure. So we have different types of dosing and amounts of substances. And so let's talk about mushrooms, for example, right? There are certain substances that you don't microdose, like MDMA, you do not microdose, okay? The people will say that, but MDMA, MDA, 2CB, you don't microdose these things. Um, LSD, mushrooms, San Pedro, these are things that can be microdosed. And microdosing is somewhere between a tenth or a 20th of what would be considered a full dose for a person to go into a psychedelic experience where they have a fully embodied, altered state where I would not advise any kind of driving or walking out into the street or anything like that. I mean, even in microdoses, I wouldn't, but that is a place where you're going to be totally altered, where laying down, sitting down, staying in your house, being in a very safe place is very important. A microdose is something that a person is, some people will call it subperceptual, and some people would say the lights look more accentuated. My body feels more alive,
A little sparkly.
a little sparkly. This is a place where we have what psychedelics give us something called neuroplasticity. And that's when the nervous system is very plastic and we can make new habits in a shorter period of time. Microdosing allows us to have that same neuroplasticity, but without the fully blown altered state. And so this is a great place for people to change subtle habits, to change self-deprecating thoughts, things that they're very focused on. Some people, when they're looking to have very hyper-focused spaces, will work with LSD so that because it's a very mind-based substance. These are spaces where a person can really create some awesome habits in body that they wouldn't be able to do in the amount of time that they could do it in psychedelics. So that would be a microdose. A threshold dose is where a person learns that this is where they start to spill over into an altered space. That's where you move from micro to a threshold.
Think of like a threshold to a door. You are now entering into the
You're
experience
entering into the
more.
experience. You haven't walked all the way through, but you're kind of on the cusp of being in that space. Then we would have what we would call a mini dose, where a person is inside of that altered state. And then we would have what we call a macro dose. A macro dose would be a full-blown psychedelic experience. And then we have mega doses where people are going into altered dimensions in that type of situation. And so these are the different places that people can go. The therapeutic spaces can be in all of them. If a person goes into a microdosing space, learns how to navigate the microdosing space, moves into a mini or mini or microdose, a mini or macro dose space, excuse me, and learns how to navigate in that space. If they want to go into the bigger spaces, they can. But the spaces in between micro and mega, the macro dose space, that's where people have very profound spiritual experiences, things that would rival the birth of a child, getting married, graduating from grad school or high school, your first kiss. These are big impact experiences. And so that is what happens in those places. And this is where people will sit for what we would call journeys, trips, and ceremonies. And that's where people have a lot of these big blowout transformational experiences, and they come back different and they need to integrate.
So oftentimes people will microdose, say they're trying to find just like being more themselves on a day to day, or they're just coming off of antidepressants because antidepressants are not designed to be long-term medications. Like I used the example earlier, they're a great cast for an arm, a support structure for a while. But then there's got to be another plan, or else they have detrimental consequences long term. And so we often will have people start to work with microdosing because they're coming off of some of those SSRIs, which you need to know which can mix because some can't. And this is where research is very important. We are not condoning the illegal or illicit use of any substances. We are not your doctor. You talk to your doctor, all that.
Not medical advice. No.
Correct. None of this is advice. We are sharing ideas over here
for educational purposes.
Exactly.
Only.
Thank you so much. But microdosing, because of that neuroplastic effect, can bring up presence to a person's day of like before they react. That is like that extra breath before they were going to get angry at their kid because they tripped over the shoes. It's this pause, presence. So it's like it can pull them back from their reactivity a little bit for some people. For others, it can spark more creativity, drawing, dance, going outside, reconnecting to nature. So it's just a micro, it's just a little boost. But for some people, that microdose can feel more agitating because there are some things underneath they've been suppressing for so long, they're afraid it's going to unleash it. So they often would benefit from a full dose experience versus the micro, because it's like we just need to drop you in the pool. It's like getting in a cold pool. It's like you can't step in one toe at a time with some people. That's why having an experienced guide is helpful. But when you can just drop someone in, there's going to be a moment of discomfort and then you're going to acclimate to it. But you know what to anticipate, maybe not what to expect, but we can get some pretty clear anticipations if we know someone's past, their present, and where they want to be in the future. And so this is where the dependency piece is where someone is and getting radical clarity around their medical history. Because for me, I did what's considered like a full dose on one of my first experiences, and it allowed me to be guided on a visualization exercise because of that heightened state in my brain. I could imagine better, like more effectively. I was able to have this person walk me and regress me back to a day before a big trauma happened that changed my life significantly. And through that visualization, I was able to literally rescue myself, that 8-year-old version of me before the trauma happened. And there was a integration of that part that had been fractured. And because that heightened neuroplastic state, it didn't change that I still knew what happened, but I didn't feel the absence, the loss, and the despair the way after it happened, because the psychedelic effect brings like impact and repetition at the same time. And so that's an example of how going into a fuller dose can allow you to have a greater capacity to actually heal some of those memories.
I love that. That's beautiful. The image of the fractured soul and the healing and the inner child and saving that little girl. It's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate your vulnerability and sharing your stories. Before we wrap up, would you like to share where people can find you and connect with you?
I mean, it's the Condor Approach. I mean, at this point, I feel like if you Google our names, throw a smoke signal, somehow it's going to drop in, when it's time.
Yes, they're gonna find you.
CondorApproach.com.
And
Yes,
then the
right on.
Psychedelic Coach podcast, we say that all the information that we teach is free. We want it to be accessible for all. If someone wants to come train with us, learn from us, that's where there's investments because it's in person only. But we have so much free resources because we wanted to ensure this information could get to anyone who needs it, regardless of resource or demographic or location.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we want people to download that red flags guide. We have an integration guide that is available that people are using worldwide to support them in integrating their experiences, no matter what their level of experience is. And so we want people to have access to this. So,
and to vet people.
That's right. CondorApproach.com is the place to go.
Amazing. And are there any last words of wisdom or guidance or encouragement you'd love to leave the audience with?
I would say, send off that's kind of sitting with me currently right now. There is a point of learning what's the difference between your intuition and your instincts. Some of us have instincts that tell us people aren't safe and that they won't be there for us. And so it can be challenging going into these experiences, finding someone to trust because you have no evidence that trust equals healing. So being able to know that is okay. Finding a guide that is okay for you to not trust them. It's one thing to, like Tah mentioned earlier, to feel nervous, feel anxious. It's another. If it's like, no, my body says, get me out of here, then it's either not time or there's another tool you need before it's time. I would rather you remove yourself and then assess, why did you run? Than to stay questioning, say, I should trust them and give your power away. Never give your power to any person, to any plant, to any fungi. People say trust the medicine in the psychedelic space. I say no, trust yourself to select the people that you feel safe to guide you.
And I have to share, since she's put us into this place, your intuition is knowing. And human beings, all of us on this planet, we know everything that we need to know, honestly, on a foundational level to get us from point A to point Z. But we have been taught how to meticulously and intricately talk ourselves out of our knowing. When we follow our knowing, that will always be the path to ease. So I invite you to follow your knowing to the path of ease.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing all your great information, your stories, your energy. Just thank you so much for being here today.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.